Hello, Kathryn here. I'm doing a little bit of grammar review today. It's really important to periodically review, especially when you're learning the fundamentals of grammar. So, in other videos, I have speculated about the declensions of words and what it could mean based on the sentence structure or just patterns I've noticed in the English translations. Now, it's all well and good to completely reverse engineer like that, but you should also kind of move from the ground up. So what I'm doing is reviewing declensions, which are based on cases. Where are you? Okay. Now, a lot of English speakers are not really familiar with the idea of cases. It's really important that you have kind of a fundamental understanding of English grammar, because most languages, as far as I know, they also have some basic rules of grammar, and they're similar in concept to some that we have. Now, there are some tenses or things like that that you won't see in other languages. You'll see other kind of huge foundational differences, like, in Russian it says that articles are omitted. So when you don't have an equivalent, this is just something that you need to memorize, and you need to accept as just being part of the language and try not to get too wound up in it. So is and are. Now, some languages I've studied have more than one form of to be, which is the infinitive in English, right? To be. So if you have to and then a basic verb in English, that's the infinitive. But this is saying that this verb is not used. So why? Well, I mean, you'd have to study a bit more, but sometimes that's just the way that the language is constructed. It's part of the logic of the language, and it just needs to be accepted. So what I should do then is understand how verbs, how demonstrative pronouns, which indicate, well, this is, like who, what, where, why, and other parts of speech are going to have declensions, which means that they are changed due to, whatever it is, whatever case you're using, whether you're talking about a subject, a direct object, an indirect object, if you're talking about possession. And that's where we get into the cases. It's so important to understand cases in foreign languages, because even though in English it may not be quite so difficult to the native speaker to understand what is meant by saying myself or him or to her, you need to not necessarily go into a foreign language with the attitude that it will work the same way. It just doesn't. German is one that I had to learn several cases, of course, and they were these certainly. Now, instrumental and prepositional is new to me, although the concept here is not new, right? What we're doing is that we are including a preposition. In fact, this would be always after a preposition, therefore it's prepositional. And I need to understand what is meant. So I have to whom, because this is an indirect object. An indirect object is, well, I have another video explaining what it is. Keeping in mind that the nominative case, or the subject, this is something that is performing an action. The direct object is the recipient of that action by the subject. An indirect object would be the indirect recipient of an act. Please look at my video on Instantly Explained Direct Object and Indirect Object for a bit more clarification on that. Of course, I need to understand how this works in actual Russian text. So I need to practice some of these sentences. Do you see why I say it's so important to not only review, but I'm actually going to write it all down again. This is the original. You can see how I wrote everything down, and then I write it down again. Do you have to do that? No. But when you have a language that has so many foundational rules, it's a good idea just to write it down again. This is, an hour a day of doing this, and that will help commit these rules to long-term memory and make them more natural. I could use Google Translate all day long, but if I'm not picking up on these differences, then of course I'm not going to really make any real progress and understand the logic of the language. What I do in those videos is to demonstrate how you can translate by context and by using a tool, but one that you can't use 100% reliably or to answer everything for you. You need to kind of figure it out yourself. Of course, this is active study session here that's going on. So I'm going to continue to study for a bit. Alright, so I did a little bit of review. So as it turns out, my original foray, I got up to, I believe, lesson 7. Where I started to do some review. Yeah, this is from, I think, the second chapter. So you can see, but then notice something. So I had started to review. Now, obviously, this means that I was hitting a bit of a stone wall. Well, okay, a bit of a barrier in terms of my progress. Here's the thing about languages with dissimilar alphabets. It's much harder to make progress and actually commit to long-term memory what you're learning when it's in a different alphabet. At least this has been my case. And I had this same experience with Farsi. I would start learning the fundamentals and even trying to review it, but just noticing that the progress was really, really slow. So I decided to turn to familiarity training. And you can see that there's quite a bit of it. What's the point of this? The point is to get used to the alphabet and get used to words and how they look, to the point where it no longer looks so foreign that your brain is actually really struggling to not only cope with the alphabet being different, but remembering foreign words. Right? There's not a whole lot of loan words. The ones that are, you still have to deal with the spelling. So familiarity training for me is a way to kind of overcome that, and I think that you should do it with any language. I mean, this is my personal opinion. This is how best I learn. In order for me to remember thousands of words of vocabulary in several languages, I have to do this. And then again, you see I'm kind of returning back to active learning. And then I'm actually out of room in this book. I actually need to go get some new books. Anyway, so that's kind of how this goes. I will study the basics, like the alphabet, because I'll go nowhere without that, and some of the major rules of grammar and pronunciation, but it's much slower than it would be if it were, say, French or Portuguese or even German. The amount of hours that it takes to reach proficiency when you're an English speaker learning a level, I think this is a category 3 language now, but this is considered a very difficult language. It's 1,100 class hours. Of course, I'm teaching myself, so I'm not going to class, so I have to figure out the best way to teach myself. Based on how I learned Farsi, and believe me, that was a very, and still is, a very slow and methodical and tedious and difficult language. I have to kind of figure it out with Russian as well. I do need to know the fundamentals, and I have to return and get it down, but I also need to find a way to actually commit this stuff to memory. Anyway, thank you for tuning in. I hope you found this of value. If you did, please consider liking and commenting and subscribing to my channel, and I will see you later.